Webinar. If you have no idea how you stumbled in here, we're doing tri-state cannabis implementation update. So updates on New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut presented by Vicente Cederberg. As you'll see in the next slide, we've got a great panel today of esteemed colleagues. My name is Michelle Bodian. I'll start with my introduction since I'm going to be your MC today. I am a counsel with VS. I sit out of kind of straddling both our New York and Boston offices, advising clients throughout the tri-state. I'm from Connecticut, grew up there, still licensed to practice law there, as well as in New York and Massachusetts. And big lover of New York. My entire family's from there, go back there frequently. So that's me, that's who I am. And then I'm going to turn it over to each of the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Charlie, and then we'll jump on over to Jennifer.
Hi everyone, Charlie Alcetti here. Currently based, out of my house in Massachusetts, but have been following the New York market closely. I started my career in New York, lived there for decades, so very interested in how that market takes off, and look forward to talking to you all about it.
Great, Jennifer.
Hi everyone, Jen Cabrera. I'm out of the New York, New Jersey office. I joined the firm in 2019 when we launched the New York office, and I am a local Newark girl. So on to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Jen. My name is Brandon Kurtzman, and I'm a partner with VS. I've been with the firm since 2014, basically specializing in regulatory compliance issues, and I've been closely tracking the tri-state progress with a focus on New York, and looking forward to working with all of these great colleagues as New York rolls out their program.
Great, thanks Brandon. And to our special guest, love to kick it over to you to introduce yourself.
Very kind, Michelle. Jeanne Sullivan. I am a longtime venture capital investor, all in on cannabis now since 2014, because that's when New York passed the Compassionate Care Act. And we were proudly part of one of those 10, only 10 licenses today. They're called ROs. And I said, I better learn this stuff. I had no idea about the war on drugs, so I had to have my eyes and brain opened up on that. But being a longtime investor, I said, this is the next big thing. I started going to MJ Biz. Troy Dayton found me. He was the founder with Steve D'Angelo of the Arcview group. They saw before anybody that investors would want to get together, share ideas and information, and as a community, invested more than $300 million in just about every cannabis company there is. So that's my background. I'm still part of that team. I advise companies, and Arcview itself finally acted as principal. So I co-manage a really interesting angel fund. We've made 15 investments, looking for more. And we advise companies have now morphed from an events entity to a real FINRA-based broker-dealer, a consulting group, and this ventures group, which I am part of. So what I'm thrilled about talking to you today is I am in New York City, and the wave is finally heading toward the Northeast. Certainly Massachusetts got that wave, but now we are thrilled to have New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York come online. We can hardly wait, and so thrilled to tell you more today.
Great, thank you. I'm really grateful, appreciate you joining, bringing a lot of valuable knowledge to our presentation today. Speaking of our presentation, quick overview of what we're hoping to hit on today. Want to talk about, a quick moment, look back, what happened in 2021. Obviously, pretty much everything for legalization that needed to get done happened. So great there. We'll just quickly hit a summary, touch on New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut as 3 individual markets. We want to quickly touch on all the various upcoming licensing rounds, just kind of the timelines and what to expect, and then get down to some nitty-gritty practical details, practical tips, application tips, funding, thinking through from all of our experience, what are some mistakes that have happened in new markets that we want to avoid. So we're going to move on and start with New Jersey and just give a brief update about what happened in 2021.
All right, we're on our slide of postcards. I like the postcards. All right. Thanks, Michelle, for kicking this off. New Jersey is the leader of the pack at the moment in terms of getting out regulations, legalizing for adult use, and opening up for applications. It has a very short head start over New York, having passed its adult use legislation in February of last year, of 2021. Though Connecticut has really come from behind and picked up. So they're pretty much on par in terms of when applications are opening up. But New Jersey has had a medical program since 2010. It has 12 licensed alternative treatment centers. Those are all vertically integrated operators. They've also issued licenses for new standalone medical cultivators and dispensaries. However, none of those are operational yet. So it's a populous state, densely populated state of almost 9 million, but it's had a small-ish medical program for a while. It's really expanded over the past few years, but like it's pretty underserved in terms of like the number of operators. So when adult use came along, this is really allowing operators to come in and capitalize on a massively underserved market with a lot of cannabis consumers in this state. So the state has appointed its Cannabis Regulatory Commission. They did that in like March, I want to say, of last year. It's going on a year now. Regulations were issued last August. Those are adult use regulations, and they cover 6 license types. Well, there's 6 classes of license, but really it's 7. There's cultivator, manufacturer, wholesaler, distributor, retailer, and delivery. And the 7th, which is not an official class, is testing laboratory. So the commission is, Michelle, if you'd like ping me or something, yell at me when I need to shut up, please do that. So the commission has announced the first notice of application acceptance. That came out last November, and they opened up applications on a rolling basis for cultivators, manufacturers, and testing labs last month. So December 15th was the first day at 9 a.m. was the first day you could put in an application for one of those 3 types. And the commission received a lot of interest. There have been a lot of applications submitted. Retail licenses will start to become available March 15th of this year. And then wholesaler, distributor, and delivery licenses, there is no time frame given yet for when those will be accepted. So that's still TBD. The regulations that New Jersey has issued also only address cultivation, manufacturing, and retail primarily. So they need to supplement with more regulations relating to those other license types. Those will come by August of this year. Also, New Jersey needs to update its medical regulations, which will be coming out soon. So it's a dynamic space. If we go to the next slide, please.
And this is Jeanne. Let me laughingly point out something. In the New York statute, of course, we're jealous that New Jersey got this advance work, right? However, the Garden State doesn't even have home grow in the statute. Go figure. And so
it's true. It's not cool.
I know. So just as you said, the regs are obviously going to address that, or hopefully, but that's my laugh on New Jersey. We have to keep laughing at that, right?
Jeanne says this as a lady who lived in New Jersey for many years, might I add.
You had to tell everyone that?
Yes, she's a Jersey girl fundamentally. So let's all remember that. Anyway, so New Jersey is offering, it's true, they don't have home grow and they need to change that. There are also other problems in the regulations. Like right now, New Jersey, you can't use a DBA. You have to use like your LLC name. So if your LLC is named like Cannabis Venture 1 NJ LLC, that has to be the name of your store. Not great. So there are going to be some changes. Anyway, there are so many license types. There's the conditional license, and then there's the annual license. The conditional is basically a way to get initial pre-approval from the commission before you have all your ducks in a row, before you have a property, before you have municipal approval and all of that. And it allows you to like get that pre-approval, do some fundraising, and then put in your annual license application. You cannot start growing cannabis or selling it on a conditional license. It's not provisional. It doesn't let you operate. The alternative is to just get all your ducks in a row before you apply and put in the annual license application. There are ups and downs for both. Happy to talk it over like on a phone call. That's not really worth going into on a webinar. But what's happened in New Jersey is that the vast majority of applications that were submitted last month for cultivation are conditional. And that is because they get priority review, and because most of the applicants only had about a month to put together their applications, and they wanted to get them in on day one. So if you wanted an application submitted on day one, there is no way you could compile an annual by that date. Looking ahead to retail, I think the percentage of licenses that are submitted as annual will really increase. So if you look at that little pie chart, I think that we're going to not see a situation where there's only 13% of licenses that are annual. That's just going to keep increasing. There's also a very complicated system of priority review. And as someone who grew up Catholic, I remember like the system of angels and archangels. It's very complicated, and where they stand, that's like New Jersey's system of priority review. It's incredibly detailed, and you really need to like spend a lot of time figuring it out. And you kind of wonder like, what's the point of this? But anyway, the highest priority is social equity business, followed by diversely owned business, then impact zone businesses. And within there are gradations. So if you're a social equity business and you submit as a micro business and a conditional, you're the top of the pack, but there are like 11 different groups. So again, incredibly complex. And I think that often one piece of advice I give clients is to not get too hung up on the priority system and where you fall within it, and instead focus on getting a full application together that is going to win, because the commission will get to your application eventually. Finally, we have here a nice little graphic from the commission showing how many applications were submitted. Hold on a sec. So how many were submitted in the first month after the applications opened up. And as you can see, 260 were conditional, 40 were annual, so 300 total. And of course, these are overwhelmingly for cultivation. So there's a lot of interest and a lot moving. Finally, in terms of like when this is all going to open up, I think we can see retail sales begin sometime in the middle to third quarter of this year. And those are going to be the alternative treatment centers, those vertically integrated medical operators, because they're the first, they are allowed to expand to adult use. Some of them are starting to do that. They already are cultivating cannabis and have been for several years. They're going to be the first ones that manage to actually get to market. And I think we're going to see some of these retailers who will be applying in March, maybe end of year, we could see some of them opening up. So it's a long lead time, but the process is well underway. So I think I can move
all right,
on.
that was speed session. Appreciate that. Jen, you snuck in Archangels. Didn't see that one coming. And you also gave a preview. We've got a crystal ball predictions of first retail sales at the end. So appreciate, like apparently in all things right now, you leading off in Jersey before the head of the pack with your prediction. So going to turn it over to Charlie to give a New York update just about what we know that's happened so far. And I will say is behind the pack, all the things we're still waiting on in New York.
Thanks, Jen. All right. So, first off, I just say, we have a sort of an update on our website called 10 Updates on New York's Cannabis Market. I'll be referencing a bunch of items from that article. So, and we can send that out with the email, just, if you want a reference source for this after the fact. So, the first one, right? So the law, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. It's interesting, right? It's got marijuana in the name, but we use cannabis in New York. That's the name of the control board and the managing entity in New York. So we're coming up on a year since it was signed by former Governor Cuomo. And the question is sort of what's happened in that first year, and based on what's happened, what can you do today? If you're looking to start a business in New York. The first point is just the Cannabis Control Board, right, which is in charge of the implementation of the Office of Cannabis Management, has been appointed. So we know who's in charge now. The chair is Tremaine Wright, and the executive director is Christopher Alexander. There's also the chief equity officer has been appointed. Of course, we can if you go to their website, I would encourage, if you're interested in New York, I would encourage you to go to the website, sign up for their updates. They have started meetings. There is a meeting next week. So, they've had, I think 4 meetings so far. This will be the 5th. Everything is on YouTube, so you can go back and watch all of the meetings, though we're going to summarize it for you here. So Office of Cannabis Management, this is the regulator in New York. It is active right now. They approved at least 1 change of control, right? So this is the Ascend MedBen transaction. Not going to get into the details of that transaction because there is some litigation pending here. But the point is that the OCM has approved the deal. Now, I don't know if they're going to be approving additional deals or they're going to wait till regulations come out. But the point is that they've started their work of regulation, and from a corporate perspective, obviously the approval of changes of control is pretty critical. So regulations, we don't know when we're going to have regulations. In an interview, the chair said, Q1 2022 for draft regulations, and then there will be a period of time where you can comment. There's 2-month period after which it'll be final, and then once you have final regulations, then they can come out with the applications, and then once the application comes out, then you've got a period of time for applications to be they go up, people fill them out, they're awarded, and eventually people can come live. So, in terms of timing, it's difficult to say. They have said, again, publicly, 18-month schedule for once the applications come out for them to finish. So that's the pretty high level in New York. We go to the next slide.
Hey, Charlie, it's Jeanne again.
Please.
Let me just highlight the things that New York has in the statute that no one else had in their statute. And that's what's going to make this great. In the statute, social consumption lounge licenses. That's what's getting everybody all excited, because we believe, those of us who are hardcore New Yorkers, serving that more than 50 million visitors a year, that we are going to be Amsterdam on steroids. I was part of a conference in the Rainbow Room in the last several months. Incredible, elegant restaurants in time are going to be able to serve cannabis beverages, have places for outdoor smoking. You can smoke today. Any place cigarettes are legal to be smoked. This is changing the game. And so that's exciting, because we're going to see many, many fabulous experiential lounges and social consumption lounges. Second of all, it is the vision that more than 50% of these licenses that will be awarded in time, as Charlie has said, it's going to take a while, to our disappointment, but all things in time, 50% as a base to be awarded to social equity applicants, and women are included in that description. So we like that. And certainly people infringed by the war on drugs. And then there is also, and this is a controversial, a big restriction on the fully large vertical operations. Only the 10 ROs, as mentioned earlier, registered organizations, are allowed to have those big integrated. There is a micro license that will be able to have multiple licenses, but at a much smaller level. And so that's a real change. So New York's going to have a lot of medical, operators, and there's some restrictions on those 10. So just to say those headlines, because that does set New York apart. Will it work? Can it work? It's very interesting, but I'm excited too about the social consumption bound. It's going to be a game changer, really globally.
Yeah, thank you. That's super. Can we skip ahead to the license chart for New York? Just because this will be in the slides, so everyone can see. It may be helpful to visualize what Jeanne was just talking about. And while we're waiting to skip ahead to the chart on New York licenses, I would just note the other, as she pointed out, right, that the social equity component of New York is pretty unique. There's also this $200 million public-private fund that's been announced that's intended to finance social equity licenses. So that's, I mean, it's a significant amount of money. Just by comparison, I was looking at the LA version of this has been dedicated $6 million to date. So, you can see $200 million is pretty substantial in the scheme of things. Sorry guys, is it possible to skip ahead to the chart?
Charlie, I'm just going to, we ended up removing that slide, so it's
Okay,
not possible
all right,
to
okay.
skip ahead.
I apologize.
We'll send it out
I'll
with
turn
the
it over
program
to Connecticut.
materials.
I'm seeing it now. But in any event, so much of the details here in terms of, how many total licenses are going to be issued, we don't know the answer to that yet. The statute doesn't have strict limitations on licenses beyond this idea that they're going to try and give 50% to social equity licenses. But there is a very strict prohibition on vertical integration other than the existing medical operators. So it's you have to really pick what license you want and stay in your lane. The social consumption people will be separate, obviously, from the cultivation people.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Sorry for the slideshow switcheroo there on you, but so I will say we're going to hit back on a lot of these states. We just want to cover the overview of where things stand, and then I think we can get into a lot more detail. I'm going to turn it over to myself to quickly hit on Connecticut. So I'd say it may be in second place in terms of being operational as compared to its neighbors. The law was passed in Connecticut. We have the Department of Consumer Protection. So the state agency who's running the medical program is also going to be running adult use, as well as the formation and active meetings going on by the Social Equity Council. They've already released what they're calling policy and procedures. They didn't need to go through full-blown regulations. I'd say not only have they released one, they've already updated theirs. So they're 2 times ahead of New York in that front. And if we can just advance the slide to the next one. In terms of application timing, we know what it's all going to look like, and it's all kicking off next month. So there's going to be multiple rounds in Connecticut, but the first round starting on February 3rd. All these various class of licenses are going to be opening up for 90 days, after which point they'll close. And for the majority of these licenses, they'll be run through a lottery, a blind lottery, both a social equity lottery and a non-social equity lottery to pick the licenses. And they're going to be awarding licenses for retailer, microgrow, delivery, transporter, and manufacturing. And again, there'll be future licensing rounds, probably later in 2022. Outside of this lottery, there's some opportunities for the existing medical operators, the 18 dispensaries, aka the retailers, and the 4 producers, aka the cultivators. There's some opportunities for them outside the lottery. And then for the general public, if you qualify as a social equity applicant and you happen to be able to pay the large application fee, you have the opportunity to apply for and receive this disproportionate impact area cultivator, only open to social equity applicants, has a high application fee, and you need to build your cultivation facility within one of these disproportionate impact areas. But that will be not a lottery, unlimited license. If you can check the box, that application is yours. If we can go to the next slide. And just throwing up here the definition of social equity applicant. There's a lot more materials that are available in Connecticut. Since Charlie referred you to our website for an article, I'm going to do the same. Brandon and I also wrote an article on Connecticut just in advance of this presentation to put together all of our source material, all the information, what we know today about Connecticut in terms of application and timing, and we'll include that in the email when you all receive this information. But essentially, social equity applicant, someone who had an average household income of less than 3 times the state's median household income for the past 3 years. In Connecticut, the 2021 median income, $74,000, would have had to live in one of these disproportionate impact areas, either in childhood or in adulthood for a certain number of years in order to qualify. So that's where Connecticut stands. Applications open up next month, and everyone's very excited to see what that'll look like and when they actually start awarding licenses. So, extremely brief summary of where we are today in all of these states. So we thought we would just take a couple minutes and kind of compare and contrast. Jeanne already kicked it off a bit with pointing out ways she thinks New York is different, but I'm going to hand it to Jen to spend a couple minutes just distinguishing New Jersey for those listening who are debating, which state is the right place for them.
So what I would say is that you should pick where you have property.
Hey, but you got 2 minutes to fill. Say more.
Okay, that's all I have to say. I'm going to sing. So it's a property game in both states, but even more so in New Jersey. So one thing to consider when you're looking at the New Jersey market is that there are 565 municipalities in this very small state, and each of them has their own ordinance about cannabis. About over half of them, close to 2/3, have opted out, though that number will change. But among the over 1/3 of municipalities that have opted in, they can control zoning. They can decide anything relating to time, place, manner. They can have their own local licensing, permitting process. So in New Jersey, most of your challenge is finding a property, because there isn't much property to be found, in a town that is going to support you. And if you can find all of those things, the state license application, like, to be honest, is quite straightforward. It's there's no cap on any of the licenses. Now, the big caveat there is that technically, according to the law, there's a cap on the number of cultivation licenses in New Jersey. But the way the CRC has, the regulators have interpreted that cap means that effectively they're going to keep processing cultivation applications, and they're just not going to allow too many of them to operate before February of 2023. So let's just put a pin in the cultivation cap. And if you're at all curious about that, feel free to reach out. But in practice, there's no cap on pretty much any license type. The state doesn't have a closing date for when they're accepting applications. They're accepting them on a rolling basis, and they're grading applications on the pass-fail basis. So it's, if you have your local support in place, it's pretty simple. So that's a nice thing. New York, we simply just don't know how it's going to look. Towns can opt out of retail on social consumption in New York, but they can't opt out of cultivation or manufacturing. And the deadline has passed for towns to opt out of retail anyway, and not as many opted out as you would have expected. Many towns, they still don't even have ordinances relating to zoning. So they're just waiting to see what the state does. So once that comes out, like, you're going to have more guidance on, okay, is the specific town going to allow it in this place? Also, towns that have opted out will change their minds and opt in. You also don't know how much local approval you need before you go through the licensing process. In New Jersey, it's much clearer where you can locate and how hard it is to do so. So I think these are just two states in very different places at the moment. That'll change soon. And you really just need to base it on, where do you have property? Where do you have connections? And if you don't have either, then start trying to get them.
Or go to Connecticut, the state you didn't mention.
Or go to Connecticut.
No, I appreciate all those tips, and comparing and contrasting these markets is helpful. Brandon, handing it over to you. Assuming no one's stolen your thunder already, how do you see New York stacking up given the unknowns?
Yeah, and I think that Charlie and Jeanne sort of hit on a lot of items that differentiate New York from the other states in the tri-state. Particularly commitment to social equity, the type of licenses that are available, the funds that there's been indications that are going to be available for social equity. If that comes to fruition, and that 200 million is available prior to licensing or in the initial stages, that will totally separate New York from really any other state in terms of implementing a successful social equity program. I think that really what differentiates New York from the other two states in the tri-state, but really any other state in the US, is that all eyes are on New York to become, maybe not the largest cannabis market in the US. It'll be second to California likely, but the most influential market in the US and in the world. And so there's a ton of pressure on the the CCB and the staff of the OCM to implement a program that accomplishes all the goals that are set forth in the law, but also set forth a program that lives up to sort of New York's reputation as a global leader in in really everything. So you just don't have the same stakes in Connecticut and in New Jersey, and that's why it's really going to be fascinating to see sort of the rollout of the regulations and details around this $200 million public-private fund, and what licensing looks like, and what the municipalities do for zoning, and the interplay between the licenses. And then you'll start to see sort of this influx of all of the existing operators in other markets trying to plant their flag in New York, because really that's going to sort of determine, I think, in many ways, a cannabis business's success moving forward, nationally, internationally, if we're looking at, broader to federal legalization. So it's just higher stakes in general, in addition to, there's a lot more unknown in New York, because in Connecticut and New Jersey, you have regulations. We know what licensing is going to look like. We just don't know that in New York. And I think that the governor and the Assembly and the Senate have done a really good job of being thoughtful about who they've appointed to the CCB, and I think the CCB is doing a good job of staffing up and bringing in individuals with experience and finance and funding and cannabis, public safety, to really make sure that the program hits on all these levels. So that's what I'd have to say about New York.
Well, thanks for saying it. And New York might have a lot going for it, but it can't call itself the nutmeg state as Connecticut can. So with nutmeg in mind, I'll quickly hit on Connecticut. I think one thing it has going for it that neither other state has is that its DCP is running its program. So it had an existing state agency who was already running its medical program, being able to transition to adult use. Yes, they had to staff up because now this is going to be a bigger, better program, but you still have the same infrastructure, the same great staff who's always been responsive and practical, and you didn't have the time delay that a couple of these other states had of setting up new agencies and all of that. So I'd say Connecticut was able to hit their ground running because they were able to use the resources, the staff, and the knowledge that they already had. So we can go on to the next slide. I think we're going to start talking money. So I'm going to hand it over to Jeanne to talk about what investing looks like, or you're really excited about one or all these markets, you want to get in, but you don't have the capital. Where do you go? How do you look? So I'm going to hand it to Jeanne, and then after her, Charlie, you want to pick up the conversation from your perspective.
Thank you, Michelle. This is one of my favorite subjects. My best credential as I speak to you is I have seen 1,000 times 1,000 companies. I've seen hundreds of CEOs and entrepreneurs in license pursuit and sharing their cannabis vision for companies over the last 8 years. So it's been pretty exciting. And Brandon, I need to change your mind. We better put at least a $10 bet on the fact New York will surpass California even as the center of the universe for cannabis.
All right, all you witnessing that bet, put it in the chat. We can. We need some witnesses. We need the paper trail.
Yeah, and I'm willing to make that a higher bet because
$10 with those investments. Come on, Jeanne.
I'm putting 100 at loud at least, because here's why. You see, certainly California has created beautiful brands and so many wonderful, exciting, interesting entrepreneurs and CEOs. But as everyone knows, there is a hefty dual market today, and the regulations have really screwed things up. They're working hard to try to fix California, but if we're smart in New York, and believe me, we haven't been. Remember, we're the state with the Rockefeller drug laws, stop and frisk and everything else. So we have a lot to make up for, but I feel very confident in the leadership. And so we're hopeful that the regulation regulations are appropriate and that we can help. Notice you heard about this $200 million fund. That is real. So there's a real need for education, for financing, and for bringing the legacy market into the legal market, because the legacy market is very large in New York. So here's what's up. So you're seeking financing, right? You want to pull together a license in one of these great states. So what's critical is you, first of all, it's not too late. In fact, it's time, if you're even considering an application in New Jersey, New York, certainly, and Connecticut. Pull your resources together. Start pulling your small team together. Hey, you say you can't pay them? That's okay. Figure out a way to give them equity or maybe a reserve salary in time once you get the financing. That's done all the time. Second of all, package your vision. You would not believe how hard that might be for many. People have a hard time putting together what they're doing, pulling it together in a succinct, either exec summary or pitch deck. Thirdly, let's say you're going after real estate. There's a lot of issues on that. It is not a game for the timid. There's specialty real estate needs and leasehold things to think about. Get an expert to your side. What about a lawyer? You need the right lawyer, not your brother-in-law. A right lawyer who understands the regulatory issues, which are complicated, and the securities issues. Vicente Cederberg is the original thought leader around what to do in cannabis companies. They figured this out because their home base has been Colorado and they were there before anybody. So right here are the resources to reach for. You need that kind of leadership and thought leadership and smart legal support at your side. It's time to also pull together the right team that can do your app. They have that capability. That's not easy to do. You might think I can do it myself. Well, good luck with that. Then what's so critical, you better understand your capital needs. That is all over the place. But how do you raise capital if you don't even have the license? Well, guess what? That's a dog whistle to you listening, because that has been figured out. And many teams have been able to do that. And there's some tricks to that trade. So put on your binoculars for the right team. Even if you don't hire them, you know who's going to be your head of retail operations or the person to procure product or to be your master grower. Those people are out there hungry, looking for you. You're looking for them. So make those connections. People want to play. They want to find you. And so now's the time to figure out some of those things that I just told you about. Back to you. Over to Charlie.
It's a tough act to follow. I'm trying to think what I can add here that would be useful to the team.
I'll tell you, Charlie, people don't understand all your capabilities so shamelessly. The things that VS can do for somebody in licensed pursuit.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll talk about stuff that we've helped people with recently. So pre-license application, right? There's you are limited in what you can do, but you can start thinking about you can think about what this chart of licenses that disappeared into the ether, but you can think about like what license you want to go for in New York, right? So you got to pick your lane in a state like New York. And then once you sort of think about what your business model is, right, which because it's not going to be a vertically integrated company unless you're an existing RO, you can think about where you want to locate, right? So the time period for the towns to opt out has passed. So you can look at a map of New York and say, where do I want my cultivation facility to be? And while, the towns, there's not a separate license, the zoning will still matter. So you can, figure out what town you want to be in and start thinking about that. Obviously, when it comes to something like retail or social consumption, where the locality can dictate time, place, and manner of that license, the local rules are going to be a lot more important. And you can start scoping out locations. Now, should you pull the trigger on, a lease right now without the full information? I mean, you could. It's a risk. But you can definitely say what won't work, right? Because we know we know the distances from churches, from educational institutions, so you can start working through the numbers. The other issue is that sometimes if the building has a mortgage, they may not be able to have a cannabis tenant because of the covenants under that mortgage. So you can start thinking about retail locations. If you've got trade, you can start thinking about your IP strategy. Obviously, it's tough to trademark things if they're not used in commerce yet. The hemp and CBD markets are active in New York, so you can proceed there. The other thing, obviously, for an application, right? If you're putting together your team the day an application's due, right, or the day the application announces, you're behind the ball, right? The competitive teams are thinking about their teams, they're thinking about the social equity requirements well in advance. So, some of our clients are building their teams, thinking about how they're going to be competitive for the application, engaging lobbyists, talking to people at both the state and local level, and getting ahead of that. In terms of capital raising, as you mentioned, you can try and raise money before the application. Sometimes people will raise money but not spend it until they want a license. You can also wait till, if you have the capital to show capital, you can often win a license and then turn around and raise money. And it can be easier to raise money once you've already won a license. So you're probably gonna need help building a team, thinking about corporate formation and financing issues, thinking about zoning and real estate issues, and then just making sure you're watching the OCM, because the draft regulations will drop before the final regulations, so you may want to comment on those rules. In addition to obviously making sure you understand them, because a lot of the details are going to get fleshed out in those rules. So that's kind of my advice in terms of what you can get done now. And I would also say, if you're in New York and you really want to get into the cannabis industry, I would not wait for New York to get live to do that. I mean, you can buy an operation or get involved in an operation in another state. I mean, the successful operators in New York are not going to be running a licensed facility for the first time. They'll have experience. This state legal market has existed for a long period of time now. So you can go out of state and start gaining experience immediately. If you don't have it, I mean, obviously you're going to want experience in your team. So if you don't have anyone with actual sort of state licensed cannabis operational experience, you're going to want to add that to your team. So, we're happy to sort of help connect people with the right people in terms of building a team. But that's kind of my advice in terms of what you can get done right now.
All right, thank you, which helpfully leads into the next slide of application tips, as well as some common mistakes made by applicants in new markets. I think we're going to start with just some application tips. Charlie hit on a couple about what you can do to prepare in New York for a state that's not yet live, but for, Jen, maybe looking specifically at you to start for a state that actively has applications live, as well as, Connecticut about to drop, New York in the future, or Brandon, your experience in Massachusetts. I guess what application tips, if everyone, starting with you, Jen, can just kind of give a 30-second thought soundbite of, what tips would you share to those listening?
My number one tip is to speak to a lawyer as early in the process as you can.
I like your tip.
Basically, because I often have clients come to me and they've already engaged maybe a consultant or a CPA, they have a business plan, but they formed a company like with ownership that won't allow them to apply for certification as a minority-owned business. And if you can't get certification as a minority-owned business, then you don't get priority review. So even if a business is 100% Black-owned, if you've structured it in the wrong way and it's all indirectly owned, you're not going to get the certification. You won't get priority review. Talking to a lawyer earlier in the process will help you troubleshoot that and avoid the expense of forming a company twice, amending it, changing your operating agreement. there are countless other issues that come up like that, like getting an operating agreement drafted by someone who's not a cannabis specific lawyer. So just knowing what the regulations are and having a cannabis expert talk to you early on, you really save time and money later.
Perfect. And I avoid saying the same answer, but I agree. I would say, and then I'll hand it over to you, Brandon, come to the application table with an open mind. Sometimes what you hope to accomplish might not be achievable given your team, your finances, your structure. So thinking through what might be possible short-term or long-term, and being open to having a change of idea and being, still excited to get into the space. But if the dream license might not be possible at this time, you certainly can throw up your hands and walk away. But if you come in with an open mind, you may be left with something to think about, some type of license and some path forward in this industry. Brandon, any tips or tricks?
Yeah, I think that's a good point you make, Michelle. And when I do consults with new clients, and oftentimes they come in with a very specific idea, like I want a cultivation, or I want a retailer in in Brooklyn, or I want a retailer in Connecticut. I try to get them to think more broadly about what it is they want to do and how they'll be able to get involved. And it's like you have a state like Connecticut where it's a lottery process. Now you seemingly are going to be able to enter into the lottery for multiple types of applications. Can you get your foot in the door with a hybrid retail, medical and adult use? If you don't win the lottery for retail, it may be sort of a good opportunity. Similarly in New York, and we'll have to see what happens, is if there's caps on the number of licenses that retail licenses are available, but you really are you really have your heart set on establishing a brand and having that brand sold in stores in New York, could that not be also accomplished through a manufacturing license? So if you have expertise, but maybe you don't want to necessarily have a license, is there a management company that you can form and partner or enter into agreements with licensed entities and provide valuable services? So there's I like this notion of kind of approaching it open-minded, coming into it open-minded, and then being flexible, because there's a lot of sort of there's a lot of disappointment in the licensing processes in a lot of states. So if you have the ability to pivot, if you can't get what you want, I think you'll be better off in the long run, and then eventually you'll have the opportunity to get it.
Perfect. Maybe if we can advance slide, and then we can talk about application tips or common mistakes. Jeanne, in your experience, what might be something that people might want to keep in mind now to prevent mistakes in the future?
I'm hopeful that our terrific audience understands this is complicated, and you must have seasoned professionals at your side to go through this alligator swamp. It is not a game for the timid. Also, I'm meeting many investors who think they want an application, and I convince them to be part of a seasoned professional who has the domain experience to stand up a retail operation or a cultivation. So that's going on. So the number one mistake I find over and over is what I said earlier on what you have to do to prepare. Be able to package your vision in a succinct way. Then show those regulators who are going to be people reading your application that you've got a team with the proper domain experience. Think of yourself as pass fail on the app. If you were investing in somebody, do you like what you're hearing? Do they have the smarts and the street savvy to pull this off? That's what they're going to be looking for. Next, to be sure to understand the numbers and the capital needs. It's very tricky. You're not going to be able to raise $10 million to stand up some cultivation without the license, but there are tricks to the trade on how to do that. And then you better have the right valuation in mind for your financial needs. And even though you may not have to prove that you have the capital in the bank, you do have to prove some financial stability. So that's critical. One little thing just to share. When we looked for our property back in 2014 for that first set of licenses, it was 1,000 feet in Manhattan from a church or school. Try finding a place that's 1,000 feet away. The new statute has only 500 feet. So I'm having a blast looking around going, there's a great place. So, we're hopeful to make this work. My last words of wisdom on this is one of my favorite lines. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So pull together, again, those resources around you so you can find your way. This is not easy. And you'll make it easier and avoid the mistakes by knowing what you're doing and how to do it. Back to you.
Thanks. And Charlie, any tips or trick, or do you want to pull out the crystal ball of when we think adult use sales will start in New York?
Okay, we're gonna make another bet here. When will be the first adult use sale in New York State? I guess I'm gonna say
Oh, dramatic pause. I like it.
fall 2023.
Fall 2023. Okay.
Oh, man.
And are we
that's
doing
terrible.
calendar fall, like the leaves drop fall? Can I get some more specificity there?
The autumnal equinox. I honestly, I have no clue. I mean, because I think it's the big question is going to be, what do they do with the existing ROs? Will they be able to transfer from medical to adult use and sell that? Because they're obviously going to be the first ones with product, right? You
Right.
can't start a cannabis operation and have product immediately.
Yeah, let me share some thoughts on that. I didn't
Please.
say this earlier. The 10 ROs today get a license to grow, extract, and they have 4 dispensaries today, all medical. The new statute allows them to acquire 4 more dispensaries, but only 3 of the 8 can be adult use. How do you like that? And they can be co-located with the medical. That's why I said earlier at the top of this conversation, it's going to be very medical, very medical. So, hey, get your medical card in the state of New York. And so that's going to be very interesting. And this is known, it's controversial. Those ROs are fighting for all 8, so 8 times 10, 80 to be adult use. They're lobbying for that now. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. So notice what's going on there. Now, another thing that's happening, there's a real initiative, Steve D'Angelo is leading this charge to bring legacy into the light, into legal. And we want to do that. I'd love to see provisional licenses for that legacy market, tested product, get them going so they can produce beautiful craft product, which, by the way, they're doing now. And so he has a 10-point program to make that happen. What about amnesty, which is critical to that? So there's a lot of initiatives going on to try to make this the great state that we want to be, again, making up for some really past sins. I say I'm disappointed to say, because I predicted earlier, it looks like 2023 again for real action and sales in the state of New York for these new licenses. As you already heard from Charlie, the current ROs have been allowed to sell flower. Up till now, no flower, no edibles, no nothing. Go figure. So the flower is coming in, although the state's pretending that they don't want people to smoke. Go figure that out. And a full range of edibles have not come in yet, but we think there'll be a loosening of that.
All right, so Jeanne, do you agree, fall 2023?
I wish it were shorter, but that's probably likely.
Okay. Brandon, just to round out the possibly disappointing predictions that is New York, do you agree with that timeline, or are you going to take a more progressive approach?
I'll say winter 2023, just to be a little bit controversial here. February 24th, 2023.
Okay, is it a leap year? Do we know? Okay, so
I don't know.
all right, I think New York, Jen, you'd already given your prediction, but if you could say it again for New Jersey, when do you think first adult use sale from an ATC, their medical operators in your state?
I would give summer 23 for New York, and New Jersey, I would think it's going to be summer 22 for the first adult use sales in Jersey. In fact,
Summer
New York might be
22?
earlier than that. I could see New York doing adult use sales from the ROs like early next year. I think Brandon's right.
Okay, and no one ever says that. And then I'm gonna say Connecticut, by the end of this calendar year, we're gonna start seeing existing retail, just to be bullish on Connecticut and say it's gonna go first. All right, and we've only got a couple minutes left. If you could just advance slide just for our contact information. Obviously, we didn't hit on everything you're discussing today. I know we saw a lot of questions coming up in the chat. I'm going to try to just in the last couple minutes pick on a couple of questions and a couple of people, but definitely please, this is our contact information. Reach out to us. If we haven't hit on your question or answer, we'll definitely have an opportunity to discuss offline. I'm going to kick a question to you, Brandon, to start, so it's not me awkwardly asking myself the question. For Connecticut, is vertical integration allowed?
So no, there's not going to be vertical integration in Connecticut with the new round of applications. It's separated into different categories. The law says that you can't have more than 2 of any particular license type. I think that we probably need some more clarification on that. So in theory, if you won all 3 lotteries, I guess you could be vertically integrated, but I don't think so is kind of the actual answer. It's like, it's separate licenses, it's not vertically integrated. You apply for each of the licenses and try to win the lottery for the licenses that you want to go for. And it's generally separated into sort of what you see in other states, cultivation, manufacturing, retail, delivery.
Okay. Yeah, I would just add, if you were extremely lucky in the lottery, there's no prohibition on vertical integration, just the reality of that happening, given the number of applications anticipated, would probably make it challenging in that state. And then, one other question that's coming in. So I guess maybe Charlie or even Jen. So the question came in New York, what's the difference between the CCB, the Cannabis Control Board, and the Office of Cannabis Management? I guess how's the oversight board playing out, their role different than the state agency who's implementing?
Well, I think that, they're in charge of setting up the agency. So they sit on top of the agency, but the real sort of nuts and bolts type work is going to be the OCM, not the CCB. The CCB is also politically appointed.
Okay, so oversight board, kind of big picture, and then OCM, the nuts and bolts day to day, actually grinding out, physically writing the applications, doing that type of work.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say from a corporate perspective, it looks like the approval, well, we could check online, but a lot of this stuff we don't know ultimately until we get the final rules. If there would be any decisions that would require the CCB's approval. The example of this, you can look at other states, like in Massachusetts, there's the Cannabis Control Commission. And there's the 5 sort of commissioners, but then there's also an agency with an executive director. So, I suspect it's probably going to work similar to the Massachusetts system.
Yeah, and I think your guess is right. Given on the agenda for next week's CCB meeting talks about delegation of hiring authority. So I assume CCB is in the position to start delegating a lot more responsibility down to the executive director of OCM. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Again, you have our contact information. I know we plowed through this incredibly quickly. We're going to follow up with a recording and certainly linking to the articles we had mentioned today, probably including the infamous slide on the New York license class. You know why Charlie was so excited. So we'll follow up. Take a look in your email for all that future information coming your way, and please reach out to any of us for any questions.
Thanks, and sorry, just if anyone's still around, I was just double checking the OCM's website. So if you look at the approval for the MedMen deal, it's the board that approved the transaction. So similar to Massachusetts, these high level decisions like a change of control is being made by the board. But I suspect once you have a huge number of licenses within the state and regular changes of control, they may delegate that down to the OCM because it can be pretty time consuming, or maybe they'll have to do it in batches, sort of like Massachusetts does.
All right, on that incredibly specific answer. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day.